It took no time at all for the wealthiest people the planet has ever experienced, 21st century college students in the West, to take to the streets to the tune of often hundreds of thousands of people, chanting, not just to the river, to the sea, but also things that are even far more explicitly murderous. And to put things like Black Lives Matter, put up a flag that had the Palestinian flag on someone paragliding. So that's literally celebrating the Hamas murderers who flew in and murdered people in Israel. Black Lives Matter. So I saw that and my brain kind of broke. So what's going on? Help me understand this with your more sympathetic, less bombastic way than me.
Yeah, well, I can make the case for that. It's not easy for me, but I can. I certainly, the way I would describe it is life was very hard in Gaza on October 6th. Some of that was due to the fact that Israel made it really hard to import stuff into Gaza. The reason we made it hard is that every once in a while, Hamas would take stuff they imported, and it would be weapons and bombs, and they would use them to kill Israelis. And so we've been tough on them since sometime after 2005 when we pulled out. We pulled out in 2005, somewhat optimistic that maybe they would
Build a
create
state.
the new Singapore. That was the myth. Yeah. They didn't. And then you can debate whether we were too tough. Every once in a while, Hamas would launch these attacks against Israeli citizens, civilians. The Israeli army would go into Gaza, very unpleasant, very dangerous. Israeli soldiers would die. Palestinian civilians would die in those encounters, horrible. And in the course of that relationship, which was never good, we tried to make sure they didn't get bombs and guns and rockets. Obviously, we weren't very good at it because they have a lot of bombs and guns and rockets, and they built a lot of tunnels. But the bottom line, which I think we should all remember, is that for most Gazans, it really doesn't matter whether it's mostly Israel's fault or mostly Hamas's fault. They have a bad life. And I understand that. A lot of Gaza is a slum. Was a slum before the war. A lot of it was really nice. I didn't realize that. I was trying to be sympathetic and felt it was mostly a slum. A lot of it was very pleasant. There were a lot of rich parts of Gaza, to my surprise, which I've discovered since the war. But that doesn't change the fact that for hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of the 2.2 million people who managed to live in Gaza, it's not an easy place to live, and there's very limited economic opportunity, and the odds that your children will have a better life than you are not so good. And I have an enormous amount of empathy for that situation. A lot of people blame that on Israel. I think that's incorrect. I think Israel bears some blame for it, but I mostly blame Hamas, which has received billions of dollars in aid and chose to funnel it in corruption to their leaders or into tunnels to create the potential for the kind of war we're seeing right now that's much different than the forays and little attempts in the past to kill a few people at a bus stop. This was horrific on October 7th. But if you're not well versed on this and you don't understand the history, and it's complicated, and that complicated history, if you just have a simplistic look, you can say, well, people in Gaza have bad lives. I blame Israel. And so October 7th was actually a blow for justice. I can understand that view. I don't think it's an accurate view. I don't accept that view, but I understand how people could hold it. The problem that I have with the October 8th reaction, well before there was much of an Israeli military response, is a lot of it was directed against Jews.
Yes.
Not against Israel. And a lot of it wasn't, this is a important political statement by an oppressed people. It wasn't it great what they did? Now, if they had killed Israeli soldiers, I could be a lot more sympathetic to it. The fact that I don't even want to say what they did to the women in those situations or what they did to people in front of their families. The woman who found out her grandmother was murdered because the terrorist the murderer videoed his killing of this woman, put it on her Facebook page so her granddaughter could see it live as a pleasant surprise. These are people who rejoiced in the murder of fellow human beings. And the fact that anyone could say that that was a just act in response to oppression, I can't sympathize with that.
But what
But
about
I think the more important,
the people who were doing that specifically, which is to say, again, distant, wealthy, largely white college students, mostly female, I think.
I don't know.
Like what's going
I don't know.
on?
I think
what's going on in the West?
so. Well, what's going on in the West? There's a lot of things going on in the West. I mean, I think as you know, and you wrote about it eloquently in that essay and in that presentation of it on YouTube. I think the easiest way is to think of it as a search for meaning. And for many people, this identity, this sympathy with oppressed people, I mean, that's basically a good thing. I'm in favor of sympathy for oppressed people. There are oppressed people all over the world. Some of them live in countries where they can't get clean water. Some of them live under the rule of dictators and autocrats who do not tolerate their ethnic group. This would be in, say, Syria or China. So it's great to identify with those people. What's fascinating about what happened on October 8th, in the aftermath of October 7th, is how many people chose the Palestinian people as the source of that fight for justice, ignoring the complexity of it, ignoring the horror of what happened on October 7th. And for a lot of Jews, accurately or not, it reminded us a lot of our historic past. And I think it's important for non-Jews to understand how Jews look at how we look at our history. Just as an example, I'll pick a couple. Every spring, we have a holiday called Passover. And in that holiday, we relive our oppression at the hands of the Egyptians. And we have a booklet that has a ritual recitation of what one does on the night of Passover, called the experience is called the Seder. Many non-Jews know of this because they're invited to Jewish homes to experience it. And we have a booklet. The booklet's called the Haggadah. Haggadah means the telling, the story, the narrative. And in that narrative, we talk about what happened to the Jews in Egypt, but of course, we also talk about our history generally. And there's a paragraph in there. And in that paragraph, it says, in every time they rise up against us. Well, gee, that's a little paranoid, isn't it? And especially for me, I'm born in 1954. Nobody's ever risen up against me in America. I've never experienced anti-Semitism in my life. My parents, who were born in Memphis, Tennessee, in the 1930s, would tell me, we've never experienced anti-Semitism in our life. I don't think that's 100% true, but that's the way they saw their experience as Americans. There's something very touching and moving about that, and made them very proud to be part of America. But that period ended on October 7th, because all of a sudden people realized that Jews realized, and many non-Jews, that there are a lot of people out there who hate us just because we're Jews. And when you ask, why is Palestine, the Palestinians, why the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, why is that the one thing that the world pays so much attention to? For a lot of Jews, we started to think, I never wanted to believe it, but maybe it's because we're Jews that they pay so much attention to it.
Well,
and so the aftermath of October 7th, I think for a lot of Jews has been a wake-up call to their identity and how their identity is perceived by people outside of that identity and other identities. And it's a little scary for a lot of people.
if you like this clip, we've got more where that came from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our new videos as they come out each week.